Hi, my name is Frank Callahan, and I'm going to give actually two talks today. One on a fallen hero from World War I who was a relative of mine named Ralph Donnelly, and I'll do a profile of that branch of my family. And then I do a second talk where I'll talk about World War I monuments in and around Worcester, including the Worcester Memorial Auditorium. And just to give you some background, I'm a Worcester native from obviously a longtime family in Worcester, and I retired from Worcester Academy last year and have given presentations locally on local history. So from there, let's go into the talk. This is the first talk. This presentation is about the Donnelly family, who are my mother's family, and in particular I will discuss my grandmother's brother, Ralph Donnelly, who was killed in action in World War I, as a way to profile this branch of my family. In this story I will mention some local history, which I hope you will enjoy, and some of the names and places I hope will be familiar to you. I used to work at Worcester Academy in the alumni office, and one day, to my surprise, I ran across Ralph Donnelly's name in an old school register. My reaction was, what's he doing at Worcester Academy? That family was poor. Well, they were not actually dirt poor, but as his father was a factory worker at several Worcester mills. But why I thought they were poor was partly due to lack of evidence. For instance, there are no photographs of the Donnellys as children, while every other branch of my family has plenty. Moreover, my research found that the Donnellys moved from tenement to tenement throughout their youth. To me, this was a tip-off that they were poor, which was probably an overreaction. Here's some of the family history. Ralph's father, John Donnelly, was born in Liverpool, England, which had a significant population of Irish immigrants. In fact, at the time, about 25% of Liverpool's population were from Ireland, especially down by the Liverpool docks. For instance, two of the Beatles, John Lennon and Paul McCartney, those are Irish surnames. In addition, Liverpool was the starting point for many Irish immigrants to travel to North America. And in fact, most of my ancestors went through Liverpool to reach the United States. John's father was Thomas Donnelly, and here is his wedding certificate on the right-hand side of this particular slide. And in the wedding certificate, it said he was married to Winifred Caton in 1852. Our reaction when we saw Winifred Caton, that's not an Irish name, so we concluded that she must not have come from Ireland. Also, you might not be able to notice it because it's on a small screen on your TV. There's an X mark in front of the name Thomas and an X mark in front of the Winifred, which meant that they were illiterate. They could not read nor write. So that's a big part of my story. I'll be talking a lot about education in this family. John immigrated to America in 1870 and immediately went to Clinton, Massachusetts, where he had Donnelly cousins. At least that's what our family believes, though we do not have documentation of the family relationship. On January 6, 1881, John married Mary Ellen Corcoran, his distant cousin. Again, this is an assumption as we do not have proof. Her mother was one of three Donnelly sisters who hailed from Athlone, a town about halfway between Dublin and Galway, Ireland. Two of the three Donnelly sisters married Walsh brothers. Mary Ellen's mother, Catherine, was the oldest sister, and she married James Corcoran, who was a padrone or job boss building railroads in upstate New York. In fact, their oldest son, John, was born in Batavia near Buffalo. Mary Ellen was raised in relative wealth. As a child, she had her own pony and later attended St. Mary's College in Nashua, New Hampshire. However, her parents died young, so she had to drop out of college and worked up until her marriage. She worked in a factory up until her marriage. For those that argue that the Irish are a matriarchal society, Mary Ellen is Exhibit A. She was part of a family that was driven to succeed. And her brother John went on to become the first Irish Catholic Superior Court judge in Massachusetts. And then her cousin David I. Walsh was the first Irish Catholic governor and U.S. Senator in Massachusetts. Thus, Mary Ellen had very high standards for her children to aim for. John worked in loom factories, and soon after their first child, James Corcoran Donnelly, was born, the family moved to Winter Street in Worcester to be near where John worked at the Crompton Loom Works on Green Street. Then he went to work at the Worcester Loom Works, which were located where the Maxwell Silverman's restaurant was located. So the family then moved to what was then known as St. Anne's Hill. The official name for the hill is Chandler Hill, but it's better known as Bell Hill up by Bell Pond on Belmont Street. But it was then known as St. Anne's Hill because in those days the neighborhood was populated with Irish families who attended St. Anne's Church on the lower part of the hill. Here's a postcard view of the church on the left-hand side, and the vintage map here depicts the location of the church. In the map on the right, you can see it, the church hopefully in purple. And then that campus in the middle is what was called the State Normal School, the precursor to Worcester State University. City View School is now located in that particular parcel. And then in the bottom shot is from Mulberry Street down underneath 290, looking up the hill to where the church once was. The actual structure was demolished in 1962, and the parish was merged in with Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Here's the Donnelly family residences on St. Anne's Hill. You might not be able to read them on the TV set, so I'll read them off to you. From 1884 to 1886 around Winter Street, when John worked down in the Crompton Loom Works. But then in 1887, they moved to Berkeley Street, corner of Gage, when he started working at the other loom works. Then in 1891, they moved to 92 Prospect Street. And then the next year, they moved to 82 Gage Street. And then in 1894 to 1898, they lived on Merrifield Street. All of these streets are up on St. Anne's Hill, or what we know as Bell Hill. And then 1899, East Shelby Street. Again, St. Anne's Hill, 1904 to 1913, 75 Prospect Street. So the family was growing. They had grown to 13 kids, and even with the birth of my grandmother, the youngest child, Kathleen, they continued to move even after she was born. And Ralph was the second youngest, and you might not be able to read it on the screen, but Mary Valentine was born on February 14th, 1889, so she was named Valentine because she was born on Valentine's Day. Here's a shot of the neighborhood today. It's filled up with Worcester's three-deckers. There's a shot of Merrifield Street, and you can see that. And then the children went to Belmont Street School, which was located where the exit ramp to 290 going onto Route 9 or Belmont Street is now, so that's long gone, of course. And then the children went on to Classical High School, which is now the Central Administration Building in downtown area. Let's see. Here's the older sons. As I mentioned, there were 7 children in the family, 5 boys and 2 girls. And Ralph was the youngest of the 5 brothers. James Corcoran was the oldest and the positive role model for the younger children. He played football both at Classical and then at Dartmouth College. In fact, he played in the first football game at Harvard Stadium and on the first Dartmouth football team to beat Harvard. Out of college, he coached at the collegiate level, both locally at WPI and then far away at Miami of Ohio. He went on to Harvard Law School and then returned to Worcester to practice law. John, known as Jack, was thought to be sickly, so he went to live with an aunt in Marlborough. Charlie also played football at Classical and then at Holy Cross. Like James, he coached at the collegiate level. In fact, he was the head coach of the University of Maryland for a period of time. Joe, the one on the bottom right, had a magnetic personality and went into car sales, which took him out to the Midwest. Older sister Val married her brother James' law partner, Charles Camlow. My grandmother Kathleen was the baby of the family. There she is on the bottom left there. And that's, by the way, that's David I. Walsh up in the top. He was the best man at their wedding. And she was the baby of the family, and she was very pretty, and she was known as Babe in the neighborhood. One day she put on a fancy outfit and pearls and went downtown to attract attention. However, she ran into her older brother James, who told her to go home and change her clothes, which she did. She graduated from Classical and hoped to go on to Smith College, but when her parents fell ill, she stayed home to take care of them. They died in 1917, roughly around the time that Ralph went overseas during World War I. Ralph did not stay at Worcester Academy, but actually graduated from Classical High School in 1911. He had started off on the football team as the mascot in 1904, but by the time he graduated, he was a star of the team. Here he is at Georgetown. You can see him in the top row. There's an arrow pointing to him. I hope you can see that. Ralph became a star player at Georgetown, was named All-Southern Conference twice. And there was also a reference that it was an All-American. This was an All-American. This was an era when sports writers gave nicknames to athletes. At Georgetown, Ralph's nickname was Tad, when back in Worcester it was Raz. One of Ralph's opponents in the college football was Jim Thorpe, who was the greatest football player of the era. Thorpe played at Carlisle College. Its former title was the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, and it was the flagship boarding school of a national program that today would be considered cruel and racist, because it was a government program that removed Native American children from their families and the reservations to be educated at these schools with the idea that they assimilate into American culture. Thorpe was considered the greatest athletes of the 20th century, and certainly he was one of the most versatile, as he played in the NFL, Major League Baseball, and ran track in the Olympics. Here's a photo of Thorpe in the 1912 Olympics, which were held in Sweden. Please note that his shoes do not match. What happened was, just prior to the game, someone stole his running shoes from his hotel room. That night, Thorpe went through the hotel trash bins and found two single shoes. One was a bedroom slipper and the other a loafer. One was smaller than the other, so the next day he put two socks on one foot and one sock on the other. Despite just wearing a bedroom slipper and a loafer, Thorpe went on to win 2 gold medals. Ralph was such a strong player that the headline proclaimed that he was the only end the Carlisle Indian feared to face. Here's a photograph of the game between Georgetown and Carlisle. You can see it on the right-hand side. Ralph and Thorpe must be someplace in this pile, and looking on was the Carlisle coach, Glenn Scobie Warner, better known by his nickname of Pop Warner. After Georgetown, Ralph returned to Worcester and coached at Trade High School on the football team. He was the head coach of the football team. In addition, he joined the Emmet Guards, the National Guard unit made up of local Irish. The city of Worcester had such a large population of Irish immigrants and their sons that a special National Guard group was formed, made up predominantly of Irish. In the lead up to the Civil War, the group had been named the Emmet Guard in honor of the rebel leader and nationalist Robert Emmet from Ireland. And the Emmets were one of several Emmet Guard companies in the United States. In fact, the Worcester Emmets may have encountered a Confederate Emmet Guard company from South Carolina during the Civil War. After the Civil War, there were a few military conflicts, so the Emmets became more of a social organization that was very prominent in the Worcester city social life. At the end of the 19th century, though, the Emmets did see action in the Spanish-American War. One member died on San Juan Hill, and 3 more succumbed to tropical diseases. By 1916, Ralph was a member of the Emmets, and the Guard were sent to Mexico, the Mexican border, to capture the Mexican revolutionary Pancho Villa and his forces. And though they did not catch Pancho and his army, they did gain great experience in military training. In addition, during this expedition, Thomas Foley emerged as the leader of the Emmets and went on to see significant action in the First World War. This picture right here I took off of a kiosk that's at the front of Foley Stadium here in Worcester, and the arrow points to Thomas Foley. And then the picture on the right is Ralph on a horse. Where did he learn to ride? Certainly not on St. Anne's Hill. Roughly a year after Mexico, Ralph was again full-time with the Emmets when the United States entered World War I. This plaque is on the landing between the first and second floor of City Hall and recognizes the Emmet Guards as they embarked to Europe. It lists Ralph as a sergeant and Foley as a captain, which was their rank prior to departure for Europe. It indicates that the company traveled aboard the SSHR Mallory. The date of the crossing is not listed on the plaque, but it is known that the Emmets traveled to Hoboken, New Jersey, and then departed for Europe on September 7, 1917. You can't probably see it on the TV, but if you went and saw the plaque, you could see that there are 24 stars next to the names of the fallen heroes. In other words, 24 of the Emmets passed away in the conflict. And there's Thomas Foley on the right. Ralph proved to be an excellent soldier and received a battlefield commission to second lieutenant. With the promotion, he was no longer with the Emmets, but was put in charge of an Irish platoon from Dorchester. A September 1918 Worcester newspaper article extolled his record of service and said that Ralph was an inspiring soldier. This photograph was taken in Nancy, France, which was close to the battlefront. A small notation gave the address of the studio as 21 Rue Saint-Désir, Pont Central, and the building appears on Google Maps. In other words, the building where the photographic studio was located still stands. That's the back, that's the front with Ralph on the left-hand side, and then there's the back of the card. On September 12, 1918, Ralph was hit in the chest by bullets from a machine gun nest near Saint-Mihiel, France. He was in the act of cautioning his men when he was hit. As he was taken away on a stretcher, he knew he would die and wanted the boys to know that he was game. He succumbed early the next day, and an early report of his wounding came back to Worcester by a letter from Thomas Foley to his wife. But it was not until October 19th, more than a month later, that official word came back to his brother James that Ralph had died. So here's a couple of newspaper columns about the passing of Ralph Donnelly. Ralph was engaged to Margaret Murray of Worcester, and he carried her picture in his wallet. 2 days after receiving word of his death, she wrote to one of his comrades, and on November 28th, received a reply from another comrade named Lyle Prowse. By the way, War I was a trench warfare where the soldiers were in trenches, and if they looked up above the trench, they would be shot at by machine gun fire. So the term going over the top was meant that you were putting yourself in harm's way and almost certain death. So here's a quote from the letter. I first met him last April when he returned to G Company from a school at Gondrecourt. I always liked him. Shortly after, he was transferred to H Company because of a scarcity of officers in that outfit. I was associated with him intimately at Fleury, Seychelles, Benecourt in the Toll sector. Later we moved up to Chateau Thierry and went over the top together in the Second Battle of the Marne. In Tringuier Woods, July 24th, we fought side by side when our battalion was enmeshed in a nest of many machine guns and snipers. Ralph was, as always, absolutely fearless and a wonderfully inspiring example both to officers and men. I cannot speak too highly of his physical courage. After relief from the big push on July 26, we moved back to Chamas Farm near La Ferté-sous-Joie, and we remained in training for a little more than a week. It was there that Ralph had charge of a complete company of replacements and did such a wonderful job. Shortly after, we went back to Haute-Cour near Arsois, where we trained further for the Saint-Mihiel drive. Ralph had H Company. Then came the long, tedious night movements up to the drive. On the morning of September 12th at 8 o'clock, after 7 hours of heavy bombardments, we went over the top. Ralph led H, I was with G. The preliminary opposition in the Boche lines was, as usual, centered around pillboxes of machine guns and snipers. At 9:30 that morning, H Company was held up by machine gun fire. Bullets were coming thick and fast where Ralph was when he exposed himself to caution and save others. As he arose and cried, "Duck, get down," he backed up suddenly and shouted, "Oh my God." Several machine guns had caught him in the chest. His lung was pierced. Every effort was exerted, and he was carried back at once on a stretcher by a sergeant and 3 Boche prisoners. A small escort went with him. That's the end of the excerpts. At the end of the letter, Prowse indicated that Ralph had been buried next to the hospital where he died in Souillet, France. A few years later, Margaret married Dr. John O'Mara of Worcester. She remained close with my grandmother and Auntie Val, and sometimes divulged to them that Ralph was the great love of her life. The family chose to have Ralph's body brought back home, and a memorial service took place at the Worcester Armory on August 8, 1921. After the ceremony, the cortege traveled down Main Street to St. John's Cemetery, and Ralph's body was interred with his parents in the Donnelly family plot. On the gravestone, Ralph is listed as a captain, which is a discussion topic in our family. His promotion to captain was en route at the date of his wounding. The rules are that a promotion only becomes official when the officer bars are pinned onto the shoulder of the soldier. So our question was he pinned while he was still alive, or was he breveted up to captain after his passing? So there's the funeral cortege on the left-hand side, and there's the grave marker for the Donnelly family where it lists him as Captain Donnelly. There are several memorials honoring Ralph and other World War I fallen heroes. This memorial on the left-hand side is at the Cathedral of St. Paul's and lists 17 parishioners who were killed in World War I. Wow, 17 all in one church? That's unbelievable. It's listed in alphabetical order, and at the bottom of the list is Homer Wheaton, who was an Emmet. This was curious to me because I thought, well, that name doesn't look Irish, but it turns out that his mother's name was Kelly. By the way, all 17 names are listed on the wall of the Memorial Hall at the auditorium, which I'll talk about in the second part of the talk. Homer Wheaton died on February 27, 1918, at Chavignon in the Chemin des Dames sector. While his company was being bombed by the Germans, grenades were passed out among the American soldiers. But when a grenade was dropped, Homer moved to cast it away. However, he soon realized that it would explode, so he held it close to his stomach to protect his fellow soldiers from the blast. For his heroism, Homer was the first recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, which had just been created by the U.S. government a few months before. After the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross is the second highest honor that the government confers. Homer Wheaton Square is in front of the Armory on Salisbury Street, just north of Lincoln Square, where there's a plaque honoring Homer. But the view is very confusing, as there's a very fine statue in the square, but that is not Homer Wheaton. Everybody thinks it's Homer Wheaton, it is not. It is actually a figure commemorating the Spanish-American War, and it is called the 1898 Soldier, and is by Worcester sculptor Andrew O'Connell, a noted sculptor. So there at the bottom of the picture is the plaque of the square, the 1898 Soldier, and you can see the armory behind the statue and everything. In addition, there is a memorial to the fallen hero Emmets at St. John's Cemetery. It's in chronological order by date of death. In this case, Wheaton is listed first, as he was the first Worcester man killed in action in the war. This memorial faces the grave of Thomas Foley, and per his grandson, school committeeman Jack Foley, the grave is in the opposite direction from all the other markers at St. John's Cemetery, as Foley wanted to be facing his fellow Emmets. Like the plaque at City Hall, there are 24 names of fallen Emmets listed here. However, only 14 of the names of the auditorium wall are listed. And again, I'll talk about that in the second part of the talk. I call this a mystery. My grandmother always maintained that her brother was awarded the Croix de Guerre, the highest medal awarded by the French government for military service. We always assumed our Uncle Ralph had it, but upon inquiry, my cousin Ralph replied he never saw it. No newspaper accounts reference the medal, yet why did he not receive an award for his valor? For instance, it is said that it was the second pillbox that Ralph attacked on the date of his wounding. Whatever happened to the rest of the Donnelly family? Well, the oldest brother, James, became a judge, and early in his career, he stayed on to take care of the family, so he married a little bit later and had 3 children. He was appointed a Superior Court judge, where one of his colleagues was Webster Thayer, the judge in the Sacco Vanzetti trial, and there's some family lore about their friendship. Jack worked in the Civilian Conservation Corps, but never really had much of a career. Supposedly sickly, he outlived his siblings, and at the holiday dinner tables would explain to the family, Ralph Donnelly was a damn show-off. Charlie was the longtime Holy Cross golf coach. His daytime job was selling insurance, and he was one of the founders of Sullivan, Garrity, and Donnelly Insurance Agency. Joe became vice president of Mack Truck. Each year he sent a $100 Christmas present to my mother and her siblings, which was a lot of money during the Depression. Here's my mother and a couple of her brothers in the toy Mack Truck. That's on the bottom left-hand side. Auntie Val had a somewhat sad life as her husband and oldest son died at an early age. Her son David was a colorful rogue and was the black sheep of the family. Then at the bottom right-hand side is my grandmother Crowley with her 7 children. She married Edward Crowley, the owner of Polar Beverages, and late in life he gave her the company. She named her second son Ralph Donnelly Crowley, and his son Ralph Jr. is now the chairman of Polar Beverages. So I'll end up with an editorial comment. Like many of Worcester's fallen heroes, Ralph was the son of an immigrant. In fact, he was the grandson of people that could not read nor write. Based on my reading, I believe most of the names of the fallen heroes on the monuments that we see all around us in Worcester are the sons and or themselves immigrants. And they remind us that we stand on the shoulders of heroes and that immigrants have made Worcester great. Worcester is still an immigrant city, and our new citizens helped to make Worcester a great city. Thank you very much.